Okay, let's see if I can make this a quick one, but quick for me. So maybe we'll still get into 10 minutes. Alright, no dilly-dally, but I'll have a quick preamble by saying nobody should care as much as they do about what exactly the shape of the Earth is, because I'm not saying that we live in a virtual reality, but that is one way of looking at it. And therefore, the shapes that things are inside a computer-generated virtual reality are kind of irrelevant, because none of those shapes really exist anyway. So that's kind of where I am with this. Now, having said that, well, no, I won't just quickly say, having said that and dismiss it. I'll say keep that in mind, and hang on to that thought all the time, that it doesn't matter, because I don't know if I said this before, but if you could get in a hot air balloon or some kind of airship and go up to the top as far as you could go, and you did hit a glass firmament or whatever way you want to imagine it, and you could hit it with a hammer and say, yeah, I've confirmed that it's a firmament. What then? Have you thought about what you're going to do then? And what if you went to Antarctica and you went, yeah, I've found the wall. Absolutely, here's the door. I open it and lo and behold, I'm in heaven now. What then? Have you prepared yourself for what you might find behind that door? And let's say you found that, yes, we are imprisoned in here, and there's no door and there's no way out. So what then? So what if you actually, wake up one day, you find you're in a cage, but you don't know where the bars are, and then one day you keep banging around with your little metal spoon that you figured out how to make, and then you hear a clang clang when you start hitting something that you thought was just thin air, and then you confirm to yourself that, yes, I am in some kind of solid prison. So what then? I mean, how do you know you're not just going to feel more despair instead of saying, yeah, thank the Lord, I am in some kind of box here. Like, where does it get you? And do you actually think that if you shared that prison cell with lots of other prisoners, all of whom have been fighting over who gets whatever food is handed out and who gets to be on top in the hierarchy that you've established, well, do you think that all of a sudden everyone will start being nice with you there because you realise there was some kind of hidden jailer? So you got to think about these things. I'm not going to give you the answers to those things, but you got to think about those things before you go looking for the door. But I will say, to kind of balance it up, I'm not saying that we live necessarily in a sort of a hellhole prison. That's, again, another valid way of interpreting it. Saying we're like bow boys and bow girls, bow little children. And we've been sent to our room to think about what we've done. And the door was never locked. And we can come out any time we want. But we're too stubborn to come out and admit that we're sorry, or even to acknowledge what we did. Now, with that having been said, let's move on. And these things do need a little bit of setting up, and a reminder to go easy, go steady, but go with preparedness. Now, I think perhaps the number one flavour of interest at the moment, the number one exciting mystery, is that of Antarctica and what lies beyond, and the possibility that the two poles aren't exactly as poles apart as we might imagine. And a lot of people might stop at the whole idea that there's some kind of portal in the South Pole. But if somebody would say, yeah, and not only that, but there's a hole throughout the whole Earth. And in fact, the Earth is donut shaped. And that once you go through one pole, you just immediately go to the other pole. And it's like a sort of wormhole or cosmic gateway or intraplanetary portal. Maybe, who knows? I'm putting all options on the table. What I'm saying is I don't know for certain. But what I do know is things are not what they seem, and therefore even things that would have been considered impossible or outrageous before now, in the new way that I'm seeing things, they seem entirely plausible. And not only that, but so obvious that I feel like quite a fool for not having seen the little in-jokes. Now, of course, from somebody else's perspective who is not ready or willing or tolerant perhaps enough to say that there may be a valid way of appearing to have gone mad, and yet make a lot of sense. Think of it as though I'm doing you a service. I'm going pleasantly mad, so you don't have to. Now, that's been a 5-minute preamble. Let's see if I can finish this meat and potatoes, the substance of what I'm trying to say here, before it gets to the 10-minute mark, so that this really is, at least in comparison, a bite-size type of video. All right, some things only occur to me when I look at them a different way. And I'll remind you again that there's several different ways. This is just one other way of looking at it. I was looking in a previous, I'll call it an article anyway, that I wrote on my blogspot. Like and subscribe, or do whatever you're supposed to do on WordPress. It's called, what did I call it? I called it extrapolations. So extrapolations.blog. Simple as that. Go there. Have a look at my polar shift article, which includes how Australia was swapped with Antarctica. I suppose you could say literally, right? Because they did do it with letters, but I don't know if they did it physically. And there's a bit more on this, so I'm going to assume that you've read that. Now, it got me thinking about a commensurate... Sorry, I already included, by the way, in that article about the Baltics. The Baltics, which are Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, or Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, or Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, going northways. Now, what are the countries beyond that? Well, it's the Scandinavian countries, although I have to say the Finns don't consider themselves to be Scandinavian. The Danish do. Now, I'm just going to focus on these 3 countries which are beside each other: Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And I think what I'll do is I will start with Finland. And Finland, well, what does Finn mean? It means the end, all right? So in French, they don't say fin, they say fin. That's just how they pronounce it, fin. I'm not really good at pronouncing small words like that. You have to really put some sort of nasal intonation at the end. I'll try one more time. Fin. No, that's not sounding any good. But anyway, that's what it means. If you see at the end of a French film, F-I-N, it means the end, right? So Finland means the end land. But there's more land up to the north of it. So what gives? Well, who knows? Maybe just somebody said that's as far as it goes, lads. After this, it's just all snow. But I think that I'm certainly willing to take at least some poetic license with these things. But I'm going further than that. Norway, what does that mean? Well, it means north way, because Nor is the beginning of Norse or north, so it's the north way. I think there's also another meaning, and it's NOrWay. And I think that might be no reverse way, or maybe it says something like, if you turn the or on its side, there's no sunbeam way, so there's no sunshine up this way. Could be more than things, but I think what's most interesting, that it's never occurred to me before, that Sweden, all I have to do is take the SW and say southwest, and what's left? Eden. So the shape of Sweden, by the way, if you just look at it in isolation, or remove Norway from the picture and include Finland, so the Finn is the end, and you could maybe say that that's the end of a man, you know, and it certainly looks like something that's coming out the end of a man. And southwest of Eden, well, in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve did something up there, and it was to do with consuming each other, consummating their relationship. And so I reckon they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden for that, and for also imbibing of knowledge that they shouldn't, because it wasn't any good for them. And I'll leave that for another time, about what that apple represents. Now, if you don't like that, what I will say is, when, and by the way, I think we're going to go over the 10 minutes here, but I'm turning around the globe now, and I'm looking at the southern pole, and just, you know, humour me for the moment, and let's just assume, even though we all know it's not, wink wink, that the Earth is not a globe, it's something else. And don't get caught into that, you know, it can only be one of two things, either a sphere, a globe, a ball type thing, or a flat linear plane, right? It can be both. It can be neither at the same time, and it can be something else too. Now, if there was a hollow Earth, it would be a donut or a toroid, as they say in maths, because a toroid you can move the axes and you can make a toroid into a sphere, or a very flat pancake, depending on how extreme you make the coordinates and measurements. And I wouldn't be surprised then, oh, by the way, of course, you can have all the ranges in between, and I wouldn't be surprised then if the Earth is able to transform into different things depending on where you're standing. And, geometry and the type of parallelograms and cuboids and dodecahedrons and whatnot, they can look surprisingly different depending on what way you twist them around. Now, the International Dateline, one of my theories and one of my methods that I use to test to see whether something fits better is like you're trying to say you're a baby, you're trying to fit a shape that you just picked up into a particular hole, and you don't really understand how the 3D shape goes into the hole, so you try turning it around loads of times, and eventually through dumb luck you get it, right? So that's kind of the method I'm using. Don't know if you saw the TV series Lost. I think one of the ways that they steer us wrong is not by just inverting everything, but by showing us something on the screen. We assume that what we see on the screen is fantasy world, it's fiction, and what we see in our daily lives is reality. And I would say it's closer to the truth to swap those two things around and say that what they show you as fiction is true, although it doesn't have to be 100% either way. But if you swap the balance around, you might find that, hey, there's 80% on the side that you thought was fiction is actually reality, and vice versa, something like that. Now, the International Dateline, of course, as everyone knows, is every bright schoolboy who's a good boy, and didn't I do well, teacher? Didn't I repeat what you just told me? Just like how you said, right? So you're not deviating from the course which they've set you. Well, I'm going to deviate from the course, and I'm going to say the International Dateline isn't an imaginary line. I'm going to say it's very real. And here's my thesis. Okay, that's a posh word for saying here's my little theory on that. There was a lot of expeditions, and I think that they started, well, we all know about the ones that Admiral Byrd did, but cast your mind back, I think roughly 100 years prior to that, which is fitting. And again, I don't think the timeframes we're talking about are relevant, not because our history has necessarily been messed with, but I'm talking about a kind of time folding here, not necessarily time travel, but time folding over itself. And yes, that's why I let you know about Lost, because anyone now who wants to laugh and say, oh yeah, he was telling the truth earlier when he said he'd gone mad for our pleasure, just take it as entertainment then. But I don't mean it that way. And I'm not even trying to sort of hedge my bets and say, oh, it's just a theory and I only just think this because, I thought it'd be fun, and I'm not going to backtrack on this. And if anyone says like, oh, you're so dumb, don't you realize that whatever, blah, 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 science, right? I know plenty of science, and that's not the point. I'm happy to be laughed at. I'm happy to be mocked, because I'm not going to restrict what my theories are just because I'm afraid that I might get mocked for it, right? You have all those baying hyenas in the classroom who laugh at somebody who put up his hand and asked the stupid question, only when the teacher says, no, Jimmy, that's silly, right? And everyone else goes then, yeah, Jimmy, that's so silly. They didn't know beforehand. They're just dying to be the same as everyone else. Like, don't I have the correct opinion? Yeah. I have the correct opinion, as teacher said, so that means I'm a good boy. Okay, you get my point. I'm not going to labour that. Onto the meat and potatoes of this here now for the Southern Hemisphere. And don't correct me on the terminology I'm using, right? It's a term we understand. Now, these people decided to start from New Zealand. Now, if they wanted to, they could have started from Pangaea, which is, as far as I remember anyway, the old name for the tip of the bottom of South America. Okay, that's going to get you a lot closer to Antarctica. Now, some people might say, oh, but they didn't know that Antarctica was a whole continent. They thought that peninsula was there. They thought it was just an island that was opposite South America. Fair enough. Okay, so forget South America. I understand then South Africa is a lot further from where they might have thought. And even if you would start from Australia and Tasmania, now there, I think that nobody could have argued at the time that it wouldn't be better to start off from Hobart or something like that, you know, in Tasmania, or Van Diemen's Land it was called at the time. So they had to have a good reason, I think, for choosing New Zealand, or they just through some kind of dumb luck chose New Zealand and said, well, I haven't seen New Zealand yet. We had a look at Australia. Let's go to New Zealand. I'm not so sure about that, but I'll give you that if that's what a skeptic wants to say. I will also mention that I think it was around the year 1850. No, I won't be specific as that because I don't remember. But I think that it might line up with a time when New Zealand was separated from the same administrative control as Australia. So New Zealand used to be just a state of Australia, effectively. And then it was cast off, you could say, as being its own sovereign entity, but it wasn't really sovereign anyway. It was just separated for administrative purposes by the same overruling authority, which is the British Empire. Anyway, I don't have to have my theory resting on that. Loads of the expeditions set off for New Zealand, and we'll say that they thought it was the closest point. Now, if you set off for New Zealand from the south of it, you would be setting off on what is roughly, I would say, about nearly one time zone away, but maybe 2/3 to 3/4 time zone away from the international dateline, from the 180 degree line. So if you go straight, direct south from there, you're going to hit land. Now, what I don't know is why did they not go straight down south? They first of all travelled east until they hit the international dateline, and then they held that course and they stayed on the international dateline, which didn't waver, by the way, from that point, although it does waver around quite a large way to the east of New Zealand, which I find suspicious as well. I don't know why it has to keep that much sea in it. Keep the Bounty Islands in or whatever. Maybe. Okay. Again, my theory doesn't rest on it. But they went west, and maybe they went to the Bounty Islands or somewhere like that, and then started heading down south on the international dateline. Curious, but you could put it down to dumb luck if you like. Now, they kept on that line, and that kept them bang on dead centre in the Ross Sea. And then when they hit the ice shelf, they didn't say, we've hit some impenetrable ice here, let's go left or right, get our bearings, let's see if there's any land to the left or right, let's see if we're actually in the mouth of a bay here, which they could have done. And I'm kind of surprised they didn't even figure out that if they would just maybe have some other vessels with them and keep on parallel courses, they could communicate with each other and say, hey, we've hit land. Where are you? You still in the sea? Yeah, come back our way then. So they could have had more than one vessel with them, and I'd be surprised if they didn't. So again, there must have been some, if all else is removed from the equation, there must have been very, very dumb luck and some very stubborn and persistent people who, for whatever reason, wanted to continue on down the 180 degree parallel. And they kept going through the ice shelf, and they kept cutting through it. They kept going and they kept going. Now, why would you do that? It just seems like a sort of a stubborn single-mindedness combined with a sort of stupidity that you don't turn back and say, well, maybe there's an easier way. So, in case it's not obvious by now, we'll just spell it out and end on this. That's where I think that if people really are invested in investigating Antarctica and want to do it, in a spirit of open-mindedness where maybe this leads to nothing, I'm not going to say it proves anything, but even if they do find something interesting, I would urge caution about leaping to conclusions and say, that must mean this, right? Okay. So be very careful of falling for all the classic logical fallacies. Go cautiously and be prepared in advance for whatever you might find. Because if you don't do some thought experiments in advance as to what might your actions be based on all the different eventualities that might be the outcome, if you don't prepare for any one of those outcomes, and if there's some outcome that you haven't thought of before you find it, you're going to be in trouble. So make sure that you don't rush headlong in, where fools only tread. I think I'm messing up that phrase, but I think it'll do for now in that form. So my question is, why continue through the Ross ice shelf? And I'll say something else as well. Ross. I haven't looked up the name of whatever sea captain the Ross guy is, right? But I will say ROSS, right? So anytime you see, well, this is my theory anyway, anytime you see two S's, okay, first of all you say, oh, that's kind of interesting, South Pole, going as far south as you can, two S's in his name, not much really, okay? Now that's a bit tenuous, right? But O represents the sun, okay? Now it's a small sun. If it's a lowercase o, which means we're talking atomic, like as in, well, an atom, an O, or a subatomic particle, or even an electron, or it could be a charged particle, an ion from a sun ray. The letter or, turn it on its side, and you can do a lot of turning and twisting through 180 degrees. So the 180 degree line, think you know what I'm saying? So you get the or, it's vertical, turn it to a way that doesn't look familiar. And I have this in one of my articles there. What did I call it? It's not the one about Australia, the polar shift. It is about the horizon. Turn the or 180 degrees so it's lying on its side, or right side up, you could say. And, sorry, not 180 degrees, 90 degrees. And what you have is basically a picture of a light hanging from a ceiling with a sunbeam coming off it. In other words, the sun, with a line above it, right? So you can't see above the sun because it's so bright, but you see a sunbeam and it's shining into your eyes. And then the two S's, all you have to do is reverse one of the S's, and you put them together and you've got an 8, which is the Lemny scale and the symbol for infinity. And it also perfectly describes the magnetic fields which envelop the Earth. I mean, in one way of visualizing it from both poles. So that's my rationale. Feel free to consider that I am not only an idiot, but an insane idiot, or an idiotic, insane person. The other thing I will say as well is that the N and the Z in New Zealand, twist them around by 180 degrees. A Z is a steering wheel of a plane or a ship, in a manner of speaking, right? It's also kind of like two vectors put together. And if you get NZ and you turn it around, no, what am I saying? Okay, New Zealand, right? Get rid of the S. Sorry, get rid of the Z and put in an S. That's like a code page change between UK and US, you could say, or Canada and US. But what you have is New Sealand. And that's what it means in Dutch, by the way. It's a new sea land. All right. So it's a new sea, and it's land in a new sea from where you set off from. I just think that there's a lot of names that we can just start looking at in a different way, or I will anyway. That's what I'm going to do. And if I look at New Zealand upside down, well, new is men, right? Just slightly backwards. So it's men going backwards. And they're trying to land in the sea. So, look, this is tenuous. I'll give you that. But there's a lot of tenuous corroborating evidence going on. And I've only just turned to look at this sun. And the light is blinding. And I'm only focusing on vague shapes here. But I'm going to get better at this. And I'll come back to you with some more supporting evidence. Corroborating evidence. I mean, none of this is hard and fast evidence at all. In fact, I wouldn't even call it circumstantial evidence. I'm just saying, here's my hunch. And in case I don't get an opportunity to get it out there, or I forget, when I move on to something else, I'll put it out there now anyway. And I'm not going to be selfish with even crackpot theories that I come up with. I'm going to say I will put it to any interested parties out there. And maybe there's a lot of people who've thought along these lines already. And they think like, oh, well, I didn't want to say it because I thought I was going to seem crazy. Well, I'm showing you my vulnerabilities here first. I think I don't care anymore what anybody thinks of me. And I've always wanted to be that way. So if nothing else, I have achieved some level of assuredness in myself by being willing to appear very foolish. Okay, so I'll take that as a win. Alrighty, until next time.